WNST series, we have been discussing all sorts of ways to say goodbye to many members of the Orioles organization. You can check them all out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault or read my work out at WNST.net as we get closer to the trading deadline, to the All-Star game, and, of course, to when Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson start to throw the football around, which, Luke, you know, officially signals the end of baseball season around here, which will happen a lot earlier than the end of the trading deadline, which will be the end of July. Adam Jones is a guy we have not talked a lot about during this series. He is the poster child of the modern era of Oriole baseball, I think, for all the winning. And seeing Markakis roll through here last week, or us roll through there last week, and Machado going out the side door. We've visited with Nelson Cruz earlier this week. A lot of moving parts, Matt Wieters as well. But Adam Jones has been the straw that has stirred the drink here, and his time's about to expire here, right?
He's been the heart and soul, and I think more so than any other figure, other than maybe Buck Showalter, this last calendar year notwithstanding, I think you point to Adam Jones, and when you reflect on this era of Orioles baseball that has been good up until the last year, and certainly this window that has slammed shut at this point, he's the one you point to. And look, Manny Machado is a better player, and Adam Jones will be the first one to tell you that. But when you talk about someone who has been the face of the franchise in multiple ways, not just on the field as far as leadership and in the clubhouse, but also someone who has invested in this community. Now, he doesn't live here year-round, but he's bought a home here. Certainly his endeavors with the Boys and Girls Club, and an array of other issues or other endeavors, he's invested here. And when you give a player a long-term contract, that's what you want. And I think Adam Jones, while his star has never been able to shine as bright as, say, a Cal Ripken or a Brooks Robinson, he's up there. I mean, he's up there at that next tier of all-time Orioles as far as someone who's meant a lot. And as much as he's been someone who, from a playing standpoint, has frustrated people with maybe a lack of plate discipline or however you want to classify it, look at his numbers at the end of the year, every single year. He's as consistent as anyone that they've had in a really, really long time. Now, he's not a Hall of Famer. He's an Orioles Hall of Famer, no question about it. But he'll go down as one of the more influential, best players of the last 30 years, which we know isn't a high bar, but that still shouldn't take anything away from what he's meant to this organization for the last decade.
Well, and then there's how he sort of appeared here, right? I mean, there haven't been a whole lot of these guys that have come in the side door in regard to trades because, quite frankly, this franchise hasn't made a lot of trades, right? Like, I guess back in the Hank Pierce era, you would look back at the McGregor and the Tippy Martinez-Dempsey deal. You'd look back at the mistake deals, the Glenn Davis deal of the 80s, or, the Mike Boddicker deal that netted some prospects, or even a Fred Lynn deal that netted a Chris Hoyles or whatever. We don't have a whole lot of that to match player to deal. Melvin Mora maybe, but certainly not a baby bird, someone who was not ready to come to the big leagues that was dealt for. We have a whole litany of the Juan Bells and the Manny Alexander types that were supposed to be something. This is a guy who came in, he's the anti-Jeffrey Hammonds. He came in and actually did it and hung out and got paid and stuck around, and we haven't had a whole lot to crow about here during the Peter Angelos era. Adam Jones is certainly one of the top 5 players of the Angelos era.
Oh, easily. I mean, especially when you acknowledge, if you're using the Angelos era, Cal Ripken was on the second half of his career. Mike Messina's certainly in there.
I'm not giving Angelos any credit. He screwed those guys up. He didn't bring them in. I'm talking about like guys that came in that he didn't screw up. I mean, name somebody that was drafted around here other than Machado. I mean, Markakis, Wieters didn't get to bigger deals. Markakis got a bigger deal because they started him earlier, but boy, there hasn't really been a lot that they've done from the ground up, and certainly from the outside in. We would hope that whoever they get for Manny Machado is still playing on this team in 2023 and contributing. I would be highly skeptical of that going into this trading season.
Well, and a lot of times that's just the nature of the beast with prospects. I mean, you just rattled off a bunch of different trades in franchise history that Some worked out beautifully, and others were awful. And I think if we did that for all 30 teams, or however many teams you want to talk about that has an extensive history, you'd find the same thing. But
yeah, the Astros are still crowing about Bagwell, right? It was only 40 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to have plenty of that. But in the case of the Orioles, other than the Frank Robinson trade, I mean, this is right there with anything else. And Frank Robinson, of course, was 30 years old when they acquired him. So in the case of this Adam Jones trade, I mean, at the time, I mean, Eric Bedard was considered an ascending pitcher, had certainly had a couple really good seasons leading up to Andy MacPhail dealing him to Seattle. And you get back a 22-year-old outfielder who, there had been some Mike Cameron comparisons. That was kind of the comp for Adam Jones at that point in time. Had a little more than a cup of coffee in Seattle to that point over the course of 2 seasons, but hadn't put it together. He and Chris Tillman, who was, I believe, 18 or 19 at that point in time, was really young. They were the centerpieces of the Bedard trade. So I don't know if anyone had expectations that Adam Jones would end up playing here a decade, but he was certainly one of the jewels of that trade, and he lived up to expectations in that way. So as far as I maybe it's because of my age, being in my mid-30s. I kind of think of the Orioles as like the post-Cal Ripken Orioles. Of that era, I mean, other than Machado, just from a pure talent standpoint.
To me, that kind of is the Angelos era, by the way, right? So, to me, I only can blame him for anything that happened sort of kind of after the strike. I mean, I can't credit him so much with 96 and 97, giving money to Jimmy Key and turning the team into something. I mean, he inherited that. It was everything that happened after that I could blame him for better or for worse. And certainly the better part would be Andy MacPhail identified these 2 young baseball players. And as I've pointed out many, many times, and I'll do all month, that is a God-given, sage-earned, years-in-the-making talent. It is a skill set to do what Eric DeCosta and Ozzie Newsome do to try to identify football players, to do it on the baseball side. We've only had one guy who's ever been able to do it around here that I can attribute any long-term success to, and that was Andy MacPhail. He could identify guys like this, and the minute he went away, that sort of went away, and the new era, the Travis Snyders and the Ryan Flahertys and the Rule 5 guys. But Adam Jones was identified by MacPhail, and for me, that makes MacPhail a genius, quite frankly, right?
Well, and there have been others, but certainly no one that has made the impact that Adam Jones has from a standpoint of where he came from. I mean, Manny Machado was the 3rd overall pick of the draft. I mean, if it weren't the Orioles taking him there, he would have gone 4th or he would have gone 5th, and he would have been really successful elsewhere. I mean, I'm not sure how much developing there really was to do for someone like him. And you can go through other top 5 picks, Wieters and Bundy, and how much developing is done there. And that's not to give the Orioles no credit for those guys, but in the case of Adam Jones, you're right. I mean, he's someone that was handpicked by Andy MacPhail. Now, the Orioles didn't develop him from a standpoint of he didn't go to the minor leagues. He came right to Baltimore and was their center fielder basically from day one. So it really is a credit to Andy MacPhail. I think as much as anything, and to kind of bring it back to the modern day, Eric Bedard was a heck of an asset, and he was still young, and he was still someone that could have been with the Orioles for a couple more years. But MacPhail recognized that in 2007 they were not a good team with Bedard, so why not try to extract value that's going to help you long-term in that way? And, you can get cheaper in the meantime. That's a factor as well, and that should be a consideration. Why do you want to pay a lot for a bad team? So I think on a number of levels, that deal really signaled the shift in what had been, at that point, nearly basically a decade of losing. And they lost for a few more years with Adam Jones. Let's make that clear, but that was kind of the start of this thing getting turned around to the point where they were able to open up a window and have a good 5-year period of baseball.
Adam Jones has made $96 million playing baseball for the Orioles. And I guess he'll get another contract. He'll probably go elsewhere. I mean, is there any thought that he stays in your mind at all? I mean, I think he's too wise to stay at this point to know what this is all about. He's been here for a decade. He's seen all the good, the bad, the ugly. I think he's ready to hit the road.
I think probably. I do think there's some chance that he stays, but
well, it's always emotional when you've been somewhere 10 years, right?
Well, it's emotional. His wife is from here. He's laid down some roots here. He owns a home here.
He owns two homes here. He bought Cal's home.
Right. Keep in mind, this isn't me saying that I think he's staying. I think there's some % of a chance that happens, but Adam wants to win. And I think we saw that come into focus with him being in the World Baseball Classic. I mean, he's wanted to win before that. Let's make that very clear. But to see him on that kind of a stage, and I get it, people listening right now will say, well, go look at his numbers in the 2012 and 2014 postseason. He didn't play very well. But there are other guys you can point to that didn't play well in the postseason until they finally break through. Eddie Murray did not have a good 1979 World Series.
Oh, I talked about that for only 15 years, 20 years. That's about all.
Yeah, and then in 1983, I mean, he hits the home run off his name at the Vet. So he had that.
When they didn't need him, they would have won it without him, Luke. I did radio. I did radio here for a few years, so I can play either side.
And you always, anytime a player fails, that's magnified, and I understand that. I get that. They're highly paid, but we tend to magnify what someone isn't rather than what they've been. And that goes back to my point as far as the consistency thing, as far as the numbers for Adam Jones at the end of the year, every single year. I mean, I think since his very first year in Baltimore, he's hit 19 or more home runs every year. He's had, I believe, 7 straight years of 25 or more home runs. Always hits around 280, 285. I mean, this guy, he's a gamer. And Buck Showalter's talked about this a long time with him. He posts up. And sure, maybe he's not at a point in his career where he's playing 162, 160 games, but he's still playing very regularly, and he's still in the lineup, and even when he's not 100%, he's out there playing more.
I told my wife the other night, I said he's going to hit 26 home runs and drive in 84 runs, and he's going to bat 287 again. That's what he does. I mean, there's nothing to say. I can't find a bubblegum card that's been more consistent than his, right? Like, literally, he's hit between 265 and 290 every single year. He's got none of those 201s in him that Machado has. He's had a little slump here, a little slump there. He's not going to walk a lot. He's going to strike out a lot, but I don't even know that he's all that diminished a ball player. Defensively, sure, but I don't think offensively he's diminished. It would not shock me to see him hit 20-plus home runs and knock in 80-plus runs wherever he goes and get his 610 at-bats. I think he'll do that the next 3 years. If you put him in a place where he can win, I think you're going to get a hell of a ball player and a good value for whatever $10, $12, $14 million you give him.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, and I think it's been pretty obvious based on what we've seen in the free agent market. Clearly this past winter, and even going back the year or two before that, we've seen a shift as far as where the free agent dollars are being spent. And the type of player that Adam Jones is, I'm in agreement with you. I think he easily can be at this level of production for another 2 or 3 years. Now, is that guaranteed? No, because he is going to be 33 years old. He has been a center fielder his entire career. He absolutely needs to move to a corner outfield spot. I think that's going to be a potential sticking point as far as any team that either acquires him before the trade deadline or certainly anyone that potentially signs him in free agency. That's going to be a discussion because defensive run saved, he's been last among AL center fielders. So it's clear. It's time. I think the eyeball test and the metrics support that. But if we come to an agreement on that, and I think Adam has spoken over the last year or two, acknowledging that eventually he's going to move to a corner outfield spot. He gets that. In the same way that Cal Ripken moved to third base eventually. I mean, it happens.
In the same way that Manny Machado moved to... Oh, not like that. A different kind of move. Okay.
Well, in the same way that Manny Machado will have to move back to third base at some point because it's just reality. It's one thing to talk about a player now when you're trying to project what they are in a couple years. This is why we were talking, at least in discussion type forums, as far as where Adam Jones was going to play. 2016, it's like, okay, he's a center fielder now, but 2018, 2019, he's probably going to have to move. Well, that time has come. So that's the one part of his game that's a little more uncertain, but I think whether you move him to left, or I think he even has the arm that he could play right field, I think he's going to be fine in that regard, and I think the bat, even though his walk rate this year has fallen back down after it had increased a little bit here and there the last couple of years. I mean, again, we're not talking about a player who's going to walk a lot. We know that, and that's maybe what's been so amazing about his overall level of consistency in his numbers is that he doesn't have the best approach at the plate, but he's made it work. And every time there's a slump, anytime he goes through a dry spell, and keep in mind, in 2016, he didn't have a great season by any means, and that was coming off of a 2015 where his batting average dipped a little bit, and he was banged up at the end of the season. Everyone was not everyone, but plenty of people were willing or eager to start writing him off to say, well, this is the decline. This is when he's going to start falling off big time. This is where it's going to catch up with him being a free swinger. And you look up at the numbers over the last couple of years, it's been right in line with where he's been. Now, the home run power this year has fallen a little bit, but he's still on pace to hit over 20 home runs, and he's on pace to have more doubles than he's had the last couple of years. So even if some of that home run power has become a little more gap power, still plenty of value there. And I think you made a good point. Him landing with a contender, whether we're talking the trade deadline or especially next year, wherever he winds up, I think that absolutely can rejuvenate him a little bit. And that's not to say he hasn't played hard. He's one of the few guys that you count on playing hard every day. But I think that absolutely can be something that reinvigorates him a little bit, and you might see an even slightly better version of Adam Jones over the next year or two.
He is Luke Jones, not Adam Jones. Adam Jones will be headed somewhere else. You can find him at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke Jones. Anywhere that Orioles coverage and soon-to-be Ravens coverage will take you. All of it brought to you by our friends at King Discount Liquors, Lottery Beer, Booze, and the best prices in Baltimore, and the best commercials, and the best outtakes with my Free the Bird shirts as well. Get over there, see Johnny Bev, get some wine and some beverages for the 4th of July and beyond all summer long. Also, our friends at Fremont Mortgage, always there for our Give a Spit events and always there for you if you're buying, selling, refinancing a home. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. You need Fremont Mortgage. Carl Delmont will be joining us to talk some more soccer as I wear my Germany sweater here on our Facebook Live and our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are in the midst of our Dear Orioles series. Individual letters to Peter Angelos and John and Lou Angelos and Dan Duquette and Brady Anderson and Buck Showalter. And now on to Adam Jones and where he stands. For this era, and maybe this is something about Brock and something about Davis, and maybe even goes back to Buck Showalter a little bit. This won't be the Chris Davis era. This won't be the Zach Britton era. This won't be the Nick Markakis era. It won't be the Adam Jones era. It'll be the Buck Showalter era, right? I mean, when we talk about this, it'll be about Buck, and it'll be probably about Buck letting Britton in if the tails grow taller on down the line. But Buck will be associated with this winning, not the players, I think.
I think Adam Jones will be right there with him. I've kind of viewed it as the Buck Showalter, Adam Jones duo, partnership, however you want to classify it. But I think when Buck Showalter got here in 2010, at that point in time, Adam Jones was just a young, talented player who had some flaws. Didn't have wasn't like a bona fide superstar just yet. Had made one All-Star team at that point. And when you had Showalter coming in, and keep in mind, that 2010 season, the Orioles were god-awful. I think some people kind of forget a little bit because Buck came in and they finished, I think, 34-23 with him managing after they had been so terrible under Tremblay and even Juan Samuel, their interim manager.
Well, this is all Buck had. All Buck had were a couple of young arms and a couple of young players. Like, literally, that was it. The cupboard was bare of real stars. It had potential stars and guys that, like Adam Jones, that you'd say, well, is this kid going to be out of the big leagues because he's going to hit 220 and try to pull everything? Or is he going to be a kid that you're going to figure out how to get 270, 280 at him and have a 10-year, 15-year career for him?
Yeah, right? And I think when Showalter arrived, there was a feeling out, so to speak, between him and Adam Jones, and I think that was a reciprocated feeling. I think Adam Jones wanted to hear from Buck as well, as far as how invested he was and what ideas he had for turning this thing around. Because in 2009, 2010, 2011, I mean, look, this team didn't win a lot of games over that period of time. But anyone who was following it, and sure, were there young players of that era who didn't materialize into contributors? Absolutely, and that's going to be the case anywhere. I mean, even you can probably even look back at the Cubs and the Astros right now at players 3 or 4 years ago that they thought were going to be big contributors, and they ended up just being okay, or they ended up being traded for someone else, and that's just how it works. I mean, there's never a straight linear path from being bad to good. I mean, there are different twists and different detours along the way, but I think when Buck Showalter arrived, Adam Jones wanted to hear what he was all about, what he thought about that current team. And I think Buck, knowing he needed some kind of ally among the players, ally is the wrong term because that makes it sound like there's cliques or special privileges or anything like that, but I think it was very clear that Buck was kind of seeking out who were the leaders on this team. And Jones wasn't really the bona fide leader at that point in time. This team had a seasoned Nick Markakis. Brian Roberts was still on the roster, even though certainly his days as being an overly productive player were winding down pretty rapidly at that point. But it was clear that Adam Jones was someone that Buck identified early on as being really important to have in his camp, so to speak, to have on the same page to start leading. Even as a young player, even as someone who was only 25 years old at that point in time, to lead and to be someone that was going to be a leader of that clubhouse. And I think that partnership really materialized early on, and I think it ended up being really not successful to the point of getting to the absolute pinnacle, but far more successful than anything we'd seen around here in a long time. So I hear what you're saying, and I think Buck Showalter will be the face of a lot of that, but I think it's going to be Buck Showalter and Adam Jones, those two, Buck in the dugout, Adam Jones on the field, as kind of being the symbols, the icons of this era that's now clearly rapidly coming to an end.
I wonder if the Orioles will ever have a player with his skin tone again who will be this good. There are far less African American players who are playing baseball, and I look at it and say it's a bit of an anomaly to have a black star in a city that had huge racial problems throughout his tenure here. It had race riots. We have to own that as a community. Our city was on fire 3 years ago. I think that is a unique part of the Adam Jones story that I don't know we're going to have that story. It's been since Eddie Murray before that and since Frank Robinson before that. That is another part of this, and what happened to Fenway Park, that's going to be part of Adam Jones's story as well around here.
Yeah, and I mean this is an issue that goes beyond Baltimore and beyond the Orioles and beyond Adam Jones. I mean it's very clear that as much as baseball's diversity has shifted on a global scale over the last 25 years, we've seen fewer African Americans playing baseball, and a big part of that is the economic reality of playing baseball. It's an expensive game in the structure that we've seen with travel teams and just opportunities, and that's a shame because there are so many great athletes living in areas that might not be as affluent. This is inner city and even other parts of the country that there just isn't as much wealth, and when you consider the system that's kind of in place with travel ball, with AAU, whatever it is, it's an expensive game to play, and I think that's where we're seeing certain. And I don't want to generalize all African Americans by any means, but Adam Jones has talked about this. I mean, players guys that would be really talented players in the inner city that have maybe rec baseball, and they're talented players, but there isn't the opportunity for them to progress and develop as they get older, and then it just becomes such a kind of a wealth system kind of sport. We're just seeing those types of things, and that's why I think you've seen the decline of baseball in inner cities, and that's a shame, because anyone who loves baseball, anyone who appreciates players like Adam Jones today, and he's not the only one. I mean, Andrew McCutchen, and you go down the list. I mean, there's a list.
It's a short list.
But right, as far as accomplished African-American players in today's game, there aren't as many as there should be. And that's a real shame. But, again, that's a societal issue. That's a big picture baseball issue as much as anything else, that you need to give kids more opportunities. It shouldn't be something that you need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars to play the game of baseball. I mean, when it's really at its simplest form, you need a bat, you need a glove, you need basic safety equipment, catcher's gear, batting helmets, etc.
Baseball's hard because you need people, unless you're going to play pitcher's hand out. I mean, in my neighborhood, 3-4 guys get together. You can play basketball. You really can't play baseball well.
That's true, and that's part of it, but I think the bigger part is the economical aspect of it. I mean, in this day and age, if you want to be noticed to get either be drafted or to get a scholarship to play at the collegiate level, and we know that college scholarships for baseball, it's not like a football team where you're giving out so many free rides. It's not like basketball where there's so many free rides. It's a more limited pool of
It's not a money sport. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, it's not.
Right?
And so many of these different showcases and things like that where scouts are there and they're taking a look at players and giving them feedback and telling them what they need to work on, those are expensive. And if you grow up in a financial situation where you don't have the means for that, there are so many players who would be great, so many players who would be future all-stars that they're never discovered, or because they don't have the financial means to continue their baseball career, they start focusing on basketball or football more, and you end up having plenty of guys who wind up at the college level or even at the NBA or NFL level that otherwise might have played baseball, but just because of kind of the way the system is set up in terms of how these players are discovered, it becomes very difficult. So that really is a shame. I'd like to think that Adam Jones won't be the last great African-American player to play for the Orioles, but it's definitely something that you think about, and it's definitely something that you hope is improved in the coming years. And baseball is doing things to try to remedy that, but they need to do more, because anyone who loves this game, anyone who talks about attendance or ratings or different things of that nature, as far as being concerned about the future of the game, you want to have the best players and the best athletes playing your sport, and that's important. And I think we've seen that in a variety of sports. I mean, I think, look at Major League Soccer compared to the rest of the world. Anytime you have a great global talent come to play MLS, that's a big deal. But for the most part, it doesn't compare to what you see in Europe. And why? Because the best players are playing there. So in the case of Major League Baseball, as it relates to other sports here in America, you want to have the absolute best athletes playing your sport. And in the case of many African Americans, unfortunately, they've gone on to play other sports because baseball has been such a system that's based on socioeconomic status as much as anything else.
All right, Adam Jones is the latest Dear Orioles entry. You can read it out at WNST.net. You can listen at in the buyatoyota.com audio vault as we get you through the holiday and get you ready for the trading deadline and get you ready for all the changes that are coming for Oriole baseball, because we'll be talking Ravens football here in no time. All of our WNST content can be found out in the aforementioned buyatoyota.com audio vault. You can also get our morning newspaper delivered to your email inbox directly and digitally free of charge at 7 a.m. each and every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Also brought to you by our friends in Laurel, where the entries are in the morning newspaper for all weekend long. They got the sports bar and the fantastically remodeled and air-conditioned club down in Laurel. So get down to Laurel Park this weekend and check out the ponies. We're getting ready for the Maryland Million. We'll be telling you more about Justify and the Triple Crown winner as well as in the front of WNST.net and our morning newspaper. Last but never least, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.